Well, hello there. This is Virtual Chess Noob learning and having fun with chess. This game that I'm going to show you really exemplifies a couple of principles. Firstly, when you review a game, you need to interpret the computer evaluation lines with some human context. So the computer can sometimes find lines and evaluations which are simply inhuman. It will give ratings according to perfect play, and definitely at the beginner intermediate level, you're not going to be playing perfectly. The second principle is that the psychological impact, the emotional flow that occurs between two players in a game of chess can sometimes be more real to who is winning or losing compared to the computer evaluation. Now that all might sound a little bit opaque, so let's have a look at this game. I had the white pieces and the opponent played the Scandinavian. So e4, d5, and of course I usually take, queen captures, knight to c3, and in this game, my opponent played the queen d8 line, so queen all the way back. Now, this is a perfectly good line of Scandinavian, though I personally think that it's a little bit of a wasted opportunity. White's a little bit ahead here, about plus 0.5, because it's almost like white ends up getting an extra turn. Black does have some compensation insofar as the open lines for the queen and bishop, but very often it doesn't end up being worthwhile for them. So here, what I usually do in these openings is to make use of the increased point of tempo. So try to develop as quickly as possible to my piece's natural development square. So at d4, they develop the bishop, potentially looking at the f7 pawn. They push a pawn, that's very necessary to prevent the attack on the f7 pawn. So now, bishop pitting the knight. They try to unpin, that's fine, develop the other knight. And here, I'm basically doing fine. I'm basically quite a bit more developed than black, though again, black is perfectly okay. Here they now play a6, which is actually a reasonably good move, and thinking that they may be trying to prepare for an attack on my bishop where they will win some tempo back, what I normally do in these positions is to push a4. The logic here is if they push, then I take, and they can't take back because the pawn is then pinned to the rook. All right, they develop their other knight, that makes sense. And here I decide to play a little bit aggressively, a little bit intemperately, push the pawn. So not the most accurate. You can see Stockfish reckons castle right away, get the king out of the center. But here I thought I've got 1, 2, 3. Whoops. There we go. 1, 2, 3 sort of a defenders. They've pretty much only have 1, 2, 3 attackers as well. I'm attacking the knight. I thought they will probably end up moving their knight rather than taking, and that's what happened. They moved their knight to the corner of the board, so even though that wasn't the most accurate move, they made a mistake, and it made it worthwhile. +2. Now, the best move here, according to Stockfish, is just to move the queen out of that the open D file. However, I thought this was potentially okay. If they take, I end up capturing the open D file. So I thought, let's just take. They take back the bishop. That's fine. I capture, captures. Now they've got an isolated E pawn. And here I decided to move my queen out of the way. Move 12. And this is pretty much where, where I felt really comfortable in the opening starts to end, and where some of the evaluation from Stockfish ends up being a little bit weird, as we shall see. My opponent now plays queen d6. Stockfish calls this a mistake, +3, and reckons that queen d7 is better. But this is really weird, because when you go down through the computer lines, queen d7, the next best move here is knight to e5, attacking the queen, and Stockfish now says queen d6 is the best move. So it's really, really odd. It's almost like step, losing a point of tempo, and yet this is the better transformation for black. So these are complicated positions, and it's not so easy to play for black. And now I think this is potentially better for black because even though that's technically the best move, I potentially block myself from attacking the e pawn here on e6. I think that's the logic here, but it's a really curious, engine sort of evaluation. Now I've got rook d1 attacking the queen. Queen now moves to the side, attacking this pawn. Here, Stockfish thinks that I should just give up that pawn. Again, that just feels a little bit weird. So I decide to play b3, apparently a mistake, apparently better to take that first. But then, I'm just not so sure about that. So it's really interesting. Now, the engine, of course, is always right. What it means is this position at the moment is complicated for both sides. And it's just interesting. Queen now to c5, attacking the knight. And here, what I decide to do is to capture, of course, defending the knight. They're going to probably capture back. Now they capture back with the pawn. So potentially damaging the defense of their king. So I thought that was potentially good for me. I decide to move my knight out of the way with an attack on the queen. They play queen b to b4. Apparently a mistake. Now, of course, that comes with check. Apparently, queen to a5 is better. And that's basically because I now potentially have c3, which attacks the queen. But again, it's hard to see that because the queen would surely just take the b3 pawn. While that move is unavailable when the queen is on the a5 square. But, it's further away from the attack. Again, very, very interesting. I decide to bring my knight back, and apparently that was a mistake. You can see Stockfish thought the c3 attacking the queen was better, allowing the queen to capture b3. Now, one of the reasons why that's a mistake is that I now no longer temporarily control the d file, and so black has the opportunity to potentially long castles, getting the king out of that problematic position in the center. They, however, decide to push that pawn because potentially what I'm thinking is captures, if they take back, potentially I can capture that pawn with check. So that's potentially what they wanted to avoid. That's fine. However, in this position now, I saw queen to h5 attacking the king forced to move, and this now becomes a permanent potential weakness for black. The king is kind of stuck, can't castle, which means one of these rooks are going to have difficulty developing. And also the king potentially becomes a target stuck in the middle. So I give another check, they move. Here, I decide to move my king out of the center with short castles. I've got very rock-solid defense potentially on this side, though, I have to be careful. The rook potentially can attack down there, but this king, their black king, is quite exposed. Here we go. Rook to g8. I decide to give a check, need to hightail my queen out of there, potentially being able to bring my queen all the way back. They decide to block the check with that rook. I wasn't convinced that was potentially the best move because, of course, it is pinned now to the king. And here I move my knight. Potentially, is there a potential check there? And also just taking the meaning that the queen is sort of a little bit disconnected from the attack, certainly blocking their attack on my knight. They develop their knight. Very interesting because that's a mistake. You can see attacking this knight, potentially captures, means I'll be forced to move away that knight, and of course that knight potentially is exposed again. So at this point, I realized I was really down on time, just a little bit over 3 minutes. They've got over 10. I couldn't see a path forward. Now, I did see this move, and I thought maybe that's the right move, but I felt a bit uncomfortable potentially with sort of reducing the defense around my king. That was the best move. So I decided to play something aggressive and decided to gambit my knight. Knight captures pawn on f6. Stockfish doesn't agree with this, thinks it's a straight up blunder from roughly, I think, about +5 to minus, what is it? Minus 0.7. So it's a really big blunder. However, what I was thinking is that that rook is pinned. They're probably going to capture with the bishop, and then I'll have the rook forward, winning a bit of tempo with another check. Now, of course, the king can potentially take that knight, unpinning the rook and activating the king itself. So that's potentially why it was a blunder, but it's a little bit hard to see. They took with the bishop, and potentially this makes it worthwhile again, even though it's 0-0-0-0. I'm down a full piece, but potentially I thought that rook won't be able to develop, because a rook to d7 with check, king back, and now obviously I can't go straight back because that is a square that's defended by the knight and the bishop, and so knight captures that pawn. All right, winning, potentially attacking. What is black going to do? Here they play queen c5. Again, a mistake. Apparently immediately attacking the rook was better. Now, potentially the problem here is that their knight is pinned. However, they're potentially, facing off against that pawn. That potentially is a good move. So here I decide, look, let's just give another check. I was thinking, do I take that rook? They move. I thought, look, I probably shouldn't take that rook because that rook wasn't doing anything anyway. So I decided to give another check, king back. This basically just gave me a little bit of time to think, effectively, because I have got a 15-second increment. So I now saw queen to h3. Again, a mistake. The winning move here actually is to bring the other rook into the picture. And that's what I needed to do. And I just didn't see this move basically throughout the entire game. However, I thought queen out of there and another potential check. And that really binds up black. One of the things is when you're giving checks in this position, even though it's practically equal, is that every time you give a check, the opponent takes a little bit of emotional damage. It feels uncomfortable. It feels like you're losing. So those checks, even though they didn't seem to achieve anything, has a psychological impact on the opponent. They now play queen d5. Again, potentially giving a double attack on the g2 square. Maybe they're thinking of sort of lining up another rook as well. Potentially good. However, I now have I decide to give a check first. Now, Stockfish reckons knight to e3, immediately attacking the queen and defending the g2 pawn, g2 square, was best. And that pretty much apparently forces black to take and take back, trading a rook for a knight. Apparently that's the best transformation. Pretty difficult to see. Here I give a check first. Now that forces their knight out of the way, and potentially here I now have knight. So I saw this move afterwards, attacking the queen, defending the square, so it's no longer mate. Queen looks like it might have to move unless they want to do a trade. Hard to see. Here, however, they decide to play queen e4. The best move for them was actually queen f3. It's not actually being attacked by my pawn because that pawn is pinned to the king. And the reason why the queen needed to go to the f3 square, really hard to see, was that they needed to defend the d1 square, because the best move for me apparently is rook to d1, potentially attacking this way, and potentially there's mate. Check, take, and that would be mate. I didn't see that. They didn't see that. And instead here, I thought, is their queen trapped? I don't think it actually is, because I did notice that, but I played anyway. Rook to c4. Kind of a bluff. You can see Stockfish thinks it's a mistake because I'm taking an attacker away from their king. And yet my opponent opted to resign because at a shallow level, it looks like the queen is trapped because the queen doesn't look like it can stay on that rank. This square and these squares are all, defended by my pieces. Here and here, potentially it's also problematic for black. And so similar here and here and here. So here, black actually opted to resign when they actually had this move. They had an escape square, queen to f3. Again, the pawn being pinned. Good game. GG. The big takeaway from this game is to not underestimate the psychological impact of moves and positions. Regardless of the engine evaluation, you win if the opponent has convinced themselves that they have lost. I hope you enjoyed this video and thanks for watching.